Diabetes is costing America $400 billion this year. It is a devastating disease. It's unbelievably expensive. Capitalism does not work in food production, and capitalism does not work in pharmaceutical development. The minute you make disease profitable, well, then you make disease profitable. George Carlin said this really well. A conspiracy doesn't require 2 or 3 evil people to get into a room and make plans together. It just requires them to have convergent interests. We have to recognize that our bodies were built to a particular design specification to survive the African savanna. So if we can learn those types of things from our ancestral past and we can combine them with the incredible advancements that are coming, we can create unbelievable lives. Yes, there may be trouble ahead, but if we do it with consciousness, we can have the most incredible future ever.
You have found that when you're trying to advertise this book and some of your ideas, your ads are getting censored.
When you start getting like shadow banned or any of those kind of things, you naturally become a little paranoid. I do like the old quote of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not plotting against you. One of the issues with writing a book like this is I'm not a doctor, but in this case things changed because a doctor contacted me. He went through one of our 90-day programs and he said, nobody ever talked to me about food and metabolism. Never happened.
What do you see for us as a species going forward?
Well, you know, there's that song, there may be trouble ahead. I think we're headed for trouble, but we're also headed for the greatest opportunity, and it's always like that.
The adults that are listening, if this is resonating a bit, what are some of the things they can do?
What we want to do is take an approach that says, I am going to take care of my body's needs. It's food, it's sleep, it's sunlight, it's breathing. Those are the things that it's all built upon. And when you've started to get that balance correct, you're incredibly robust.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Edmeades, the health coach, business speaker, and author. You are a leading authority in the study of behavioral change dynamics and have shared the stage with names like Sir Richard Branson and President Bill Clinton. Your latest book, Post-Diabetic, explores the realities of those suffering with diabetes and the dangerous influence of big food manufacturers. You then break down a clear method for reversing pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Ultimately, you believe that by adopting a lifestyle that mimics the seasonal cycles of our ancestors, people can improve their overall health. Eric, welcome to London Real.
Thanks for having me.
It's great having you. I think we jump right in here, and I'm going to start with a quote that you have said that maybe ruffled a lot of feathers in a lot of places. And you have said that, quote, type 2 diabetes is optional and in most cases, reversible. This means that if you don't have to get it, no matter which relatives of yours might have had it, and it means that if you do have it, you don't have to, end quote. As we hear that, the shockwaves go over big pharma, big food, big media, big government. Why is that such a dangerous thing to say in this day and age?
Managing diabetes is incredibly profitable. You know, managing it works really well. In fact, as an example, I don't know if you had the experience yet. I'm sure that as you cross through the 40s and suddenly menus look a little harder to read, and you need those glasses, right? And well, the FDA approved recently an eye drop, apparently, that you can drop in your eye, and for about 8 hours, you don't need your reading glasses. It softens the lens and so on. But you have to take it daily, and I can't help but wonder how much of the developmental budget for that eye drop was designed to make it daily rather than, say, monthly or permanent. Now, I know it's a little bit jaded, but the truth of the matter is that the guy who discovered the principle of exogenous insulin and then how to synthesize insulin, Banting, he sold the patent for that to the University of Toronto for $1 because he believed that insulin was a right. He believed that people who needed it had the right to it and it shouldn't become a big profit center. And somewhere between that transaction and today, it got lost in translation.
Wow. And so diabetes is probably one of the biggest ailments that requires that regular medication, which is what makes a lot of money for a lot of people. It's probably that and blood thinners and statins that is what profits this massive industry. And like you said, that regular use of that is something that we should always be suspicious of, maybe for health reasons, but also for this profit reason.
Yeah, I think that the profit reason is a big part of it. And then I think there's also a human problem, and that is that humans very often want they often want the easy path or the shortcut. And so, if you can imagine, if I'm your GP and I sit down with you and I look, Brian, you're pre-diabetic now, and what you're going to need to do is give up some of your favorite foods. You're going to have to start doing some exercise you don't really want to have to do, or I can just give you these pills. So people also have to take a little bit of personal responsibility about, opting for shortcuts, because shortcuts come with costs. So on the one side, you've got this obviously, capitalistic drive toward profitability from pharma, which is that, chronic diseases are profitable. And on the other side, you have consumers that want shortcuts.
Right. And the stats are pretty shocking. I mean, you said that over 100,000 Americans die each year from diabetes complications. 7 out of 10 people in America are on the diabetic spectrum, and a lot of them don't even know that.
Yeah.
And that's growing.
Yeah. It's growing rapidly. I mean, in the 1970s, which you and I remember, you needed to be over 40 years old to get type 2 diabetes, basically. I mean, it was even at that point called adult onset diabetes, because with the state of the food industry and life in general at that time, it took 30 or 40 years to manifest the condition. Now, I mean, the way the food industry is today and the way life is today, you have teenagers that are pre-diabetic. It's happening much more quickly, much more widespread. And that's devastating for a number of reasons. One of them is that diabetes is a damaging disease. In other words, the condition itself isn't really the problem. It's what the condition does to you over time. It causes circulatory problems and other things. So, you're eventually going to lose your eyesight, for example. Well, if you get it in your 40s, it might take another 20 years to damage your eyes sufficiently to lose your eyesight. But if you get it when you're 15, all that damage is going to be happening much more quickly. And I remember reading this thing recently about that we're now birthing a generation of children that will have life expectancies not simply shorter than their parents, but literally shorter than their parents. That there are children on the whole now that won't outlive their parents because of the way things are today with the explosion of diabetes and obesity.
That's crazy, because I'll have people in here like Peter Diamandis and David Sinclair, who are longevity experts, who are now telling me that kids born today are going to live to 120 and 140, except for the fact of what we're feeding them.
Yep.
And that could be actually taking it back down towards zero.
That's right. The potential is for that incredible longevity. There's no question about that. The reality is that with the food industry being the way it is today, and with the education and food regulation being the way it is today, we're seeing a drop. In fact, life expectancy, I think in the US, has now just downticked 2 years in a row or something like that. Like it shouldn't be doing that. There's no reason for it to be doing that, but it is happening.
Somebody posted a video on Twitter the other day, and it was somebody who had stuck a camera on a tripod, I think in New York City in the 50s. And you don't see many of these things where it was like this kind of non-intentionally made video. And it just showed people walking by. And all the comments were fascinating. It's like, wow, nobody's overweight. It was just really interesting.
Yeah. And if you were doing a casting call to reshoot that scene, it wouldn't be so easy to get the cast lined up.
No, and it's just like, so then you then ask these questions that you're asking a lot, like what was different back then? You know, it's not like everybody was going to the gym. It's not like everybody, was doing intermittent fasting. So then, well, what are the other culprits? It was probably what was on the shelves of the supermarket at the end of the day, right? And so what has changed, and what are the big red flags that people need to be aware of? And I love the fact you also link it back to personal responsibility, because just pointing the finger at big food and big pharma isn't the solution either.
One of our big messages, and this is very, very important for anybody who's carrying extra weight, particularly if they've gone out into the, say, obese range, or they developed type 2 diabetes, the first message we have for them is actually the opposite. It's to say it's not your fault. It isn't your fault, because you're living in an environment with education, food regulation, and food production around you that basically makes it very difficult to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So it's not their fault, but it is their responsibility. Nobody else will take the kind of responsibility for their health that they need to. So once we say, hey, look, this has been done to you, but now you need to do something about it. And that's our job, is to help them figure out how to do that. So in order to understand the nature of the problem, one of the things we want to figure out is what caused it. If you can't solve it if you don't know what caused it. And that's difficult. I mean, what humans very often want to do is find the one thing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's this. It's sugar
It's
caused.
high fructose corn
It's
syrup.
high fructose corn. That's got to be the problem. But I would suggest to you that as the Romans knew about diabetes, and they did because what they would do is line up soldiers in a line and have them pee on the ground, and then they'd know which soldier peed in each spot. And then from the ants' behavior, they could tell which of the soldiers had too much sugar in their urine. In other words, this is not high fructose corn syrup's fault. High fructose corn syrup has certainly done some serious damage, but it's a cumulative effect of many changes. And I would say that the beginning of the problem was when we made changes to our food production and supply substantial enough to remove seasonality. Humans evolved, basically starvation was the number one threat to humans for most of our history. And so we had to evolve behaviors, but also metabolisms that would allow us to survive the seasonal fluctuations that Mother Nature foisted upon us. She wasn't very nice. I mean, one day she'd come along and go, "Hey, Brian, look, all the berries are on the tree and there's lots of fruit, vegetables. And you know what? There's even some honey for you." And that would last for a couple of weeks. And then she'd come along and go, "No more food for you. Drought. In fact, water's going to be difficult." And that would last for some time. And then suddenly she'd go, "Okay, you can have water again. And with the water, plants are going to come back and the hunting's going to get good." And we would run through these cycles. And we didn't have to use willpower to do that. They happened to us, but we did have to survive them. So one interesting way to look at this is bears, right? We all know that bears fatten up for the winter. How do they do that? Do they have an app? Did Apple produce a app for them? Oh, look, it's time. No. Berries and other carbohydrate foods became very prolific and common during that season. They ate them in abundance. And as they ate them, it stimulated their craving to eat more. In other words, the more sugar they ate, the more sugar they wanted. It slowed their metabolism down. It started putting their metabolism into, say, hibernation, preparing them for real hibernation. And then they went into winter. What do you think would happen to that bear if we left them in that season? If we just left them in fall? Obesity and diabetes.
Got it.
So I think that's where it begins. And it started a long time ago, but then it hit this massive acceleration, from 1940 to 1980 and from 1980 today. Matter of fact, I believe that at the turn of in 1800, the average American was eating about 4 pounds of sugar a year. By 1900, it was 40 pounds of sugar. That's already a pretty big jump. But today it's about 154 pounds of sugar. So sugar is clearly part of the problem. And then you've got high fructose corn syrup. Then you have seed oils, the sudden vegetable oils that have barely anything to do with vegetables. And all of these cumulative things and additives and preservatives, they're all contributing. But at the end of the day, we now have metabolic imbalance and it's dangerous.
Wow. And the education, there is no education when it comes to food. I mean, you pretty much, it's...
Well, there's education, but it's confusion.
Right. I mean, the pyramid and all this. And again, you've got a lot of the agencies that we've now seen from some of what happened during the pandemic that are really in bed or sometimes the same people as...
Self-regulated.
Right. Self-regulated.
Food industry self-regulated, pharma self-regulated. The food pyramid's interesting. So you will remember probably the 4 food groups that we grew up with in North America. The 4 food groups were stimulated.
They're like vegetables and fruits and grains, meats, and then, I don't know.
Meats and then dairy products,
Yeah,
I think.
okay.
And the idea there is, it's actually a neat metaphor. You remember the game Risk?
Yeah.
So you have your little color pieces and you're trying to take over the planet.
Great game.
The food industry they play the same game, only their board is the plate. And so you've got the meat people trying to get their share of the plate, and then you got the carb people trying to get their share. And the only way they can increase their share, there's only 2 ways they can do it. The one is to get people to believe that their food is better,
right,
or that the other food is worse, right? So anti-marketing. So you've got all these little lobbyists that are marketing to build up the value of their food, and at the same time, they're anti-marketing their competitors. So they're always trying to win each other's share. And the best example of this, and this has been discussed on, it sounds conspiratorial, but it's very common knowledge at this point. But the sugar industry figured out that sugar consumption was correlative and possibly causal for heart disease in the 1940s and 50s. And so they realized that was bad for business. And so they hired a couple of Harvard researchers, paid them about $50K in today's money, and said, "Could you frame fat for this?" And they published an article, and they published a study that said fat is the problem and we need to move. And that got published in one of the journals that didn't require disclosure of funding. And so it became lore. And we all, and no kidding, I think the guy's name was Andrew Haas. I don't know why the name sticks in my head. And he was like the chairman of the Beet Growers Association or something. And in roughly 1954, he's giving a speech. And he says in the speech, he goes, "Some interesting news has happened today. it turns out that fat is the culprit that's causing this horrible and prolific expansion of heart disease. And so as the American people turn away from fat, if we can claim half of the fat calories and maintain our current 20%, we're in for a boon of profitability. I mean, he said this. But what he didn't say to everybody that day was that he paid for the research.
Got it. Wow. And that was early. This is 50s?
Oh, yeah.
60s?
It's been going on a long time.
And so my mom had us drink non-fat milk when I grew up in the 70s.
Yeah.
It was skim milk. And that, I'm sure, was a result of what that study was.
Yeah.
Because fat was bad. And then we heard about the eggs and then the cholesterol and all that. And then, of course, that morphed into the low-fat industry that was really the high-sugar industry.
Yeah.
And we went through this whole cycle back when there was no internet and there was no way to put out any alternative media. And it worked.
Yeah.
I mean,
eggs are such a good one because right here in this country, the Daily Mail, I mean, what an incredible publication.
It's one of the biggest global publications.
It is
now, isn't it?
massively read. 2 articles, some time apart from each other. One of them says, eggs are prohibitive. Their eggs are, help to fight against the development of diabetes. Another one, headline says, the consumption of eggs tied to increased risk of diabetes. And as I believe that not to be true, I thought, what I'll do is I'll do something most people don't really get to. And that is, instead of just getting my education from the headline, I'll actually read the story. So in reading the story, I found the study that they talked about. And then I went a step way further than most people. I decided to read the study. And so now I'm reading the actual study. And the study was 2,000 people. And it went on to say that a strange thing was observed. And that was that for some people, they had a slight uptick of blood sugar in the study, but only women. And that was really puzzling to me because men and women have some differences. There's no question about that, but not that different that you would produce, your metabolism would run that differently. I'm curious. So I keep reading. Now, wait, before I get to keep reading, you have to understand it said a slight uptick in blood sugar. So from there, the Daily Mail goes to increases risk of diabetes. That's already a pretty big logic jump, right? That's clickbait. There's something not right there. But then you read the disclosures of the study. And in the disclosures of the study, it says right there, the women in this study largely did not enjoy the consumption of eggs in boiled, poached, fried, or scrambled form. And so they ate their eggs in the form of baked goods, including muffins. I'm not kidding you. So from women eat muffins causing increase of blood sugar, we go to eggs cause diabetes.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And what does that teach us?
Well, I think I saw Denzel Washington say this the other day. He goes, if you don't read the news, you're not informed. And if you do read the news, you're misinformed. We have to be discerning.
Yeah. Do you think we've all learned to be a bit more discerning in the past 4 years or not?
That's a really interesting question. I would say that many people have, and that many other people have even become more locked into not doing that. One of the big things that happened over the last 4 years is that manipulative marketing campaigns and slogans were designed to shame people for thinking for themselves. So, you suddenly had this thing of people chastising you for doing the research. Well, pre 4 years ago, if you were going to go buy a car, you would go do the research and see if that was a good car to buy. Especially if it was a second-hand car, you'd go buy the Lemonade guidebook and you would do the research. But suddenly, starting in the last 4 years, for who knows what reason, in order to do research, apparently you needed to be a PhD. And so the minute you wrote, well, I've been doing some research about this thing, oh, you did your research. And so it sort of shamed the idea of thinking for yourself. And I think that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah. It's, and then again, a lot of the slogans and some of this you can now trace back to be this kind of psychological warfare and really getting you on a team or off a team. And I think some people are aware of it and others aren't. And now everyone's getting better at it.
Yeah.
You have found that when you're trying to advertise this book and some of your ideas, that those are now your ads are getting censored.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. Obviously, we've gone through some censoring over the years and we know what it's like. I must say, until it happens to you, you always think it's the weirdo that it happens to. That's what I thought all my life. It's like the weirdos get censored. And then when it happens to you, you're like, wow, you really have to rethink what's going on here.
Or what a weirdo is.
Yeah, or what a weirdo is. Yeah, well, maybe I like weirdos. What was your experience and what do you think is happening?
It's hard to say. One thing that happens when you start getting blocked or have ad accounts shut down or shadow banned or any of those kind of things is you naturally become a little paranoid. And that doesn't mean you're right about everything, but I do like the old quote of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not plotting against you.
Yeah.
So, one of the issues with writing a book like this is I'm not a doctor. And for years, I had people asking me to write books about the work that we've been doing. And I chose not to do it because I knew that I would face that attack. But in this case, things changed because a doctor contacted me and said, it's actually a fascinating story. He called me on a Zoom call and he said, listen, 5 months ago, I was in 2 car accidents in a week. So basically what happened was he was 40 pounds overweight, type 2 diabetic, hypertensive, and on 10 prescription medications. And he's a doctor running 3 medical clinics in Southern California. He was an assistant professor of medicine at UCLA and a medical internist for many years. And on his way to his clinic, twice in 1 week, he stopped off at Starbucks to get himself some energy because he was so out of energy and still fell asleep behind the wheel of his car twice in a week. Luckily, nobody was hurt in either accident, not badly, but he was hurt from a conscience perspective. He went home after the second accident and thought, how can I be a doctor? I can't even heal myself. How can I do that? And he went online and somehow he found one of my master classes and he went through one of our 90-day programs that this book is kind of written, inspired by. And then he got on the call with me and he goes, I've lost 40 pounds. I am no longer type 2 diabetic. I am no longer hypertensive and I'm off 9 of my 10 prescription medications. It took him a few more months to get off the 10th one. And he said, we need to get this message to the world because I can tell you something right now. I went to medical school for a number of years, many years, and nobody ever talked to me about food and metabolism. Never happened. And as a medical internist working at the hospital, every Tuesday or whatever day it was a drug day. It was the pharmaceutical companies came and they told us how to look for symptoms in order to prescribe their medication. And we never once had a food day. We never had a metabolism day. And so we need to get this book out into the world. That said, I'm still getting attacked by people saying I have no right to write the book because I'm not a doctor. My co-author is a doctor. The foreword is written by one of the most well-recognized doctors on the planet. So I think the other side of it is that some of the places that we might want to advertise, well, they sell advertising revenue to companies that sell drugs that people will stop buying when they're not diabetic anymore. And so it feels as though maybe that's part of the driving force as well. But then, as I said, you start to feel paranoid. We shipped a bunch of books into a country. I'm not naming the country because I'm not getting in more trouble than I am. They seized the books. They seized them and they said, you're not getting them back. And I don't know what, again, maybe it was something else. Who knows why they seized them? But you start feeling a little like the weirdo.
Yeah. So I've been here. All right. So April 6, 2020, we had the second largest YouTube live stream in the world. And 30 minutes later, the video got banned. And then I started a big public fight with YouTube that ultimately led to our deplatforming. We had been a partner. I'd been down to the headquarters. We had made millions of dollars. And they said, you can't talk about masks and distancing and vaccines, et cetera. So I believe in freedom of speech, so I didn't care anyways, and we just did our own thing. But I was at the time trying to figure out, why would YouTube care about this? And then someone said, oh, they own 3% of this company, and never added up to me. And now 3 or 4 years later, I have people like Mike Benz and people who have spent their careers studying this, and they say, Brian, it's just much bigger. It's not just a media company. It's really a government that is also there to protect all of the big global companies. And they do it as a matter of interests. And it's just bigger. And I'm wondering if you think that is possibly going on here, because food is big and pharma is big and banking is big and media is big. And the government ultimately is looking out for the interests of these companies. Is it bigger than just, oh, this company is doing this thing?
I think George Carlin said this really well. He said that a conspiracy doesn't require 2 or 3 evil people to get into a room and make plans together. It just requires them to have convergent interests. And so you could take the position that government is protecting these large corporate entities and that's part of what's going on. Or you could look at it the other way, that those large corporate entities have their tentacles so deeply into the government that they're protecting the government the way they want it to be. And so it's, again, the sort of George Carlin idea is that there's a capitalist. Look, I'm a capitalist. I don't believe that there's a better system of value exchange currently. Maybe one day there will, but I don't think there is. But capitalism does not work in food production. And capitalism does not work in pharmaceutical development. The minute you make, for example, disease profitable, well, then you make disease profitable. And And so reversing diabetes, like quite literally, think about this. I mean, diabetes is going to cost America $400 billion this year. $400 billion. And one thing I really like to do for people, because I don't think people really appreciate what billion means. Like you often see in the press, they talk about millionaires and billionaires. And I think they don't realize that a homeless person has more in common with a millionaire than a millionaire does with a billionaire. To spend $1 million is to spend $83,333.33 a month for a year. It's gone. A billionaire would have to spend at that same rate for 1,000 years. It's a lot of money. Diabetes is costing America $400 billion this year. The defense budget, now, I should have checked this before I came on, but I believe the defense budget's only about $800 billion comparatively. It is a devastating disease. It's unbelievably expensive. And it's expensive because it's profitable. The minute you take somebody and run them through an 8 or 9 week program where they don't have to be, where they can be post-diabetic, they can reverse the condition, immediately that's a loss of revenue. Now, I'm not saying there's any one evil person at a pharmaceutical company that's thinking about that, but the machine is.
You said capitalism breaks down on those two pieces. Is it also because there is government food subsidies for things that shouldn't even be produced? Is it also true that vaccines have no liability to them? Is that what makes them also not part of this capitalistic system?
At the most basic level, at the very most basic level, let's go back to the eye drop example. Imagine you and I are both scientists working for some pharmaceutical company, and I walk in and I go, guys, I figured out reading glasses. I have an eye drop. You take it once and your eye is done and it's clean and it's over. And we're like, holy cow, that's amazing. What's the market potential? Oh, we've done some market testing and people are willing to pay up to $3,800 for the single drop because they don't want to wear glasses anymore. That's amazing. Then you go in and you make your presentation and you've developed a daily. And it's like, it's a daily and they have to take it every day and they have to take it for the rest of your life. Which of those two products is going to get its funding? I'm sorry, but the subscription-based medicine is going to get that funding. It's just, that's the way that's going to be. And I think that's the beginning of it. Then you build it up from there. Like the idea that pharmaceutical companies can escape liability. I understand the principle. I understand the idea is that, well, look, if you're trying to develop some population saving thing, then we have to take the risk away from you. But at the end of the day, the risk is there. Somebody needs to bear that risk, and it shouldn't be the people. And it definitely shouldn't be the people if they've been commanded to take it.
Right. Yeah, we can go down that way as well. We can go down that rabbit hole a bit. And I agree with you on the conspiracy. It doesn't have to be a bunch of people in a room. It just has to be, oh, wow, this message is going to get people to stop doing this behavior, which is going to hurt our sales, which means I'm going to call up my government guy and say, I'm not contributing to your campaign this year if you allow this to happen, because we like business as usual. And you've even talked about someone like the ADA, you said seems more interested in getting millions, from big food and pharma than it actually is from helping these people. And ultimately, if you help them, the organization can disappear sometimes.
Yeah.
So like the problem with government organizations is by definition, they need to survive. And that means they need sick people as well. And we saw with COVID, a lot of crazy conflicts of interest that I never knew were possible between the CDC and people owning patents and people with financial interests in all of these places. And I just assumed there was a wall or a Chinese wall or a version of a wall, but it doesn't seem to exist in a lot of these places.
No. In a previous book that I wrote before the post-diabetic book, it's called The Evolution Gap. And in The Evolution Gap, I put forward a theory. And the theory is that our biological evolution, of course, is very slow, and our capacity for innovation is very fast. And so we have steadily changed the environment that we live in much more quickly than our genetics could keep up. And so in the middle of this, there's this gap, and that gap is where most of our pain and suffering is. And I would say that even some of the things we're discussing now are there, because you see, for the vast majority of our history, we were living in nature, dealing with threats of the environment, threats of wild animals, threats of other tribes. We lived in fear a lot. And all you really need to do to control a population is frighten them enough. If you frighten them enough, they will surrender their freedom for security. And we've seen a lot of that. And a lot of advertising works that way. Like, here's a funny thing. We are, I would argue, living in, I would say demonstrably, the very best times in the history of Earth to be alive. I mean, did your great-grandparents have a hot and cold running shower?
Yeah.
Did they have a toilet inside the house? Like, we live in the very best times. You walk down the street, you're not likely to get mugged, you're likely to be alive tomorrow, and you know damn well you're going to eat and you're going to sleep safely. That's new. That's a very new thing. We live in today, the average girl gets 11 years of education for every 12 that a boy gets. It's almost a parity. And in secondary education, they get better. Like in every way, life has become better. Less people are in poverty today than ever before. But most people don't know this. And that's because the press understands that in order to move people, you have to frighten them. And so we're constantly being told how terrible life on earth is. And the truth of the matter is, we are living in the best times ever to have been alive.
Yeah. And yet now we have these massive problems.
Yeah.
What is the solution? What do we do here? What can people do? And can you fight against these big entities?
You know, I've been at this for a very long time, and I've looked at it from different areas. Let's say you want to make a change at the public health in a given country. You have to look at the way that country is set up. You have to look at the way their healthcare is set up. So for example, in a country like the United States, where healthcare is not an automatic right of every person the way it is here with the NHS, then you recognize that probably the change you're going to need to make is going to need to be more consumer-led. It's going to need to be more consumer-led because the government doesn't benefit in the same way. Here, the government benefits directly if they're able to turn a disease like diabetes around. So in each country, you have to take a slightly different approach. You're still going to deal with all the lobbyists and all those other interests that we talked about. But looking at it from that perspective, I believe that the change has to come from both ends. We first have to work with consumers and get them to understand that type 2 diabetes is, first of all, much worse than most of them realize that it is. You see, look, if you go into the doctor's office and you've got the x-ray up there and they go, look, I'm really sorry, but we found a mass and this is bad. I mean, they drop that news on you like an anvil. Like, that's bad news. But if you walk in and you have type 2 diabetes, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're type 2 diabetic now. And so here's a pamphlet with some lifestyle recommendations that we make for you. And we can definitely manage the disease. And here's your metformin or whatever the solution is. What they don't tell you is that what this really means is that your body is no longer capable of processing sugar properly, and your blood is getting sticky. You're going to start retaining water. You're going to develop circulatory problems. You're going to feel tingling in your fingers eventually, and that's probably going to lead to the amputation of at least one of your limbs. You're going to lose your eyesight. And by the way, you've upticked the odds of you developing heart disease and cancer through the roof. I think if they told them that, the people would be a little more motivated to make a change. But instead, it's like, no, don't worry, we can manage it. So the first thing is people have to understand how bad it is. It's bad. It is not good. And the younger you are when you get it, the worse it is. Problem number one, or message number one. Message number two, it's not your fault. Don't be ashamed about that. When somebody comes along and says, oh, if you just ate a little more and you just moved a little, if you just ate a little less and moved a little more, you wouldn't have this problem. No, it is not like that. That is a food industry. Look, the tobacco industry did something very, very smart in the 70s. They noticed, of course, product liability suits were on the way. They knew they were coming. And they knew they were coming and they had to prepare for them. And, there's only two ways that you can tamper with a jury. One is against the law and the other one is very expensive. The one that's against the law is to find out where the jury members live and bribe them, extort them, threaten them. Not really, that's frowned upon behavior. But the other way you can do it is you can deliver a message into society that is so prolific and so common that when you get your jury pool selection, those people already think a certain way. And so what did they do? They propagated the idea that lung cancer was a lifestyle disease. And by calling it a lifestyle disease, the jury was predisposed to blame the consumer immediately. Like, oh, it's a lifestyle disease. And guess what? For the first 10 or 15 years of those product liability cases, mostly tobacco won. They defended themselves well and they won. And then in around about the 80s, that whole lifestyle disease thing stopped working. And then the tobacco company started losing in a major way. And then many of them started turning to investing in the food industry. And now diabetes and obesity are lifestyle diseases. Sure, they have to do with your lifestyle. But when your lifestyle has been educated, regulated, propagated by the food industry, the soft drink industry were the people that invented the idea that if you just did a little more exercise, you can have more calories.
Oh, did they?
Oh, yeah. It was a brilliant move. I mean, they were like, people don't want calories. They figured that out. People are afraid of calories. What can we do? We can, first of all, develop disastrous chemicals that can give us 0-calorie drinks. And secondly, what we can do is give people justification for having more calories. If you just go for a run, everything's going to be okay. And you quite literally have people going, well, I'm planning on having a Big Mac today, so I better go to the gym.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, if you ever talk to an athlete, nobody thinks that way.
No.
I would never think that. In fact, the more you train, the less you want that nonsense, or the less you want to put it in your body.
Yeah.
Let's talk about beverages, because I know you don't want to point one thing, but if you had to point one thing, it would probably be high fructose beverages, because that's probably the single biggest damaging thing.
Yeah.
Because it probably onboards more calories cause...
Yeah, but I wouldn't start there.
You wouldn't. Okay.
Breakfast cereal.
Okay.
And the reason, by the way, is that breakfast cereal is the gateway drug. Most parents, are not letting their children get to the high fructose corn syrup stuff that young, but they're starting with breakfast cereal super young. And look, my first company here in the UK, we sold barcode scanning systems, inventory management, logistics management. So my clients were like Sainsbury's, JD Sports, Debenhams, and what have you.
Okay.
So I know a fair bit about that side of the business. And what I can tell you is that breakfast cereal companies literally pay grocery stores to put their cereal at kid height. They do that because they understand a very powerful marketing principle. It's called pester power. So you're a dad or you're a mom and you're walking through the grocery store with your 5-year-old and they've put the coolest Star Wars toy inside a box of sugar. And so the kid's like, oh man. And by the way, can you buy that Star Wars toy? No, that Star Wars toy is not anywhere to be found except in that box. And your kid has to have it. And so the kid's like, I gotta have it, Dad. I gotta have it, Dad. Well, next thing you know, you got that box of cereal in your house. And that was the gateway drug that's going to lead to the rest of it. That's going to, first of all, what's going to happen? Well, they're eating a nuclear flavored sugar. Like they're eating this unbelievable sweet food, which means suddenly fruits and veggies are just not going to taste very nice.
Right.
That's why they don't like it, because their taste buds have been so overwhelmed by garbage that stuff doesn't taste very good. And that means later when you say, well, here, would you like a glass of orange juice or would you like a glass of Sunny Delight? Well, I mean, orange juice tastes a little off compared to that unbelievable sugar. And so for me, it really starts with breakfast cereal.
Okay. Wow. So we hit them early. It seems it's like, again, Trojan horse. It seems healthy. They advertise themselves as healthy, but massive amounts of sugar. Yeah. That gets them on the train. Yeah. And then what comes next? Beverages come soon. You have a great case study on Coca-Cola.
Yeah. I mean, obviously all the beverages and they're hit with that stuff really young. Here's one thing I say to parents, because I get this a lot. You know, we parents are always asking me, what do I do with my kids? And I go, it depends on how old they are. There's a different approach at different ages. So the other day, I'm sitting with some friends of mine and they have a 4-year-old boy. Such a great kid. And we're sitting in the restaurant and the father is drinking a Coke, which I'm like, I didn't know people still did that. I use it for cleaning stains out of the toilet. Like it's very good at that, but he's still drinking it. And then he does something that just blows me away. He says to his little boy, try this. And the little boy says, no, because 4-year-olds don't like new things very often. That's why if you didn't get them introduced to broccoli before they were 4, then at 4, they don't want to try it.
Yeah.
So they're stubborn at that point. And the little boy says, no. And he goes, no, come on, you're really going to like it. And no kidding, he convinced his little boy to drink the Coca-Cola. And of course, when the little boy drank the first sip of Coca-Cola, this hyper sweet flavor, the kid loved it. What I would say is, the longer you can wait before introducing your children to those things, the better. But you also shouldn't deny them those things. Because this is also a fascinating thing about child psychology, and I'm no child psychologist, so it's all theoretical, but my oldest is 25 and my youngest is 7, and we've got 2 in the middle. I have some breadth of experience, and I would say that children are rebels. In fact, all humans are actually rebels, as long as they're allowed to be. But it starts when you're about 1 year old, right? Like your parents are trying to feed you, and they've got the train's coming in, the plane's coming into the hangar, all the games you have to play to get the food into the kid's mouth. And then the kid goes, give me the spoon. They want to do it themselves. And then they promptly put the food in their ear. They don't know how to do it, but the way they learn to do it is by rebelling against you and developing the skills. It's their job to rebel against you. But the challenge is, when they get to about 9, 10, 11, 12, if you are still the thing they're rebelling against, then they're going to vape. And then they're going to eat junk food. So somewhere in that window, you have to figure out how to join their rebellion. And you cannot possibly join the rebellion by denying them those things. Okay. So you run into a bit of an irony. And one of the ways that I would suggest dealing with that is what I went through with my little girl quite recently. We went on this horseback trip through the jungles of the Dominican Republic, and she loves riding horses. We rode all day, and then that night we stopped. We had a bunch of friends with us, and it's a campfire. Well, if it's a campfire, I mean, Brian, there's got to be marshmallows, right? There's got to be marshmallows.
Ugh.
And I had already agreed that there were going to be marshmallows because all her friends were going to want them. And so what do? Do I say to her, no? No. If I say no, I am the thing to rebel against. So I say, yeah, you can have marshmallows. Just remember. And she goes, remember what? And I go, remember, they don't always make you feel very good. And she goes, okay, Daddy. She goes, how many do you think I can have? And I said, I think 1 would probably be okay. I think beyond that, not such a good thing. So I'm doing my thing and we're having a campfire and I'm not watching her every second. So it turns out she has 3. I don't know this. The reason I find out is that night at like 1 o'clock in the morning, she wakes up and she's ill and she vomits. Yeah, not a major thing, just a little vomit. And then she goes, Daddy, I'm feeling really sick. And and I feel terrible. Oh my God, my love, I'm so sorry. I really thought one wouldn't hurt you because I didn't know she'd had 3. And she goes, Daddy, I didn't have only 1. I had 3. And that's why I got so sick. To this day, she won't touch marshmallows. It was not by restricting her from having them. It was about allowing her to experiment with them with consciousness. And it's very important that you give that consciousness in advance and not afterward. If another great example, children often have temper tantrums an hour and a half after sugar. Give them a Sunny Delight or a Coca-Cola or whatever the thing is, and then they spike their blood sugar and they produce all this insulin, and then they have a blood sugar crash, and then they become moody and temperamental and difficult. And this is not restricted just to children. But if you do this with a child and they go to a party and they eat lots of cake and ice cream and they eat all that stuff, then they have this crash. If you now say, oh, it was the cake and ice cream, that will not work.
Right.
That will not work. They won't believe you. They won't work. But if you predict it, hey, listen, you're going to the party. I know they're going to give you cake and ice cream and stuff. There's just one thing I want to remind you about that is that sometimes after that stuff, you have a bit of a meltdown. And I just want to remind you. So you can have it if you want, but remember that does happen sometimes. Miraculously, an hour and a half later, when they start having a temper tantrum and you don't say anything. You don't say anything because if you say something, it's an I told you so. You just kind of let them have it. And then no kidding, at some point your child will look up and go, Daddy, it was the cake and ice cream, wasn't it? And the next time they go to a party, they will think twice.
Wow. Talk to me about these rituals that we've now combined with sugar. I think it's important to talk about them because I don't think people realize we're in them. Birthday party, here's a bunch of cake and ice cream. Halloween, here's some candy. Campfire, forgot about that one. Marshmallow. I mean, again, these places have inserted themselves into our rituals. Champagne's another one. Celebrate, pop a bottle of champagne. Yeah, another great idea. But talk to me about those and how people can recognize them and then choose if they want to participate in that narrative or not. Because most of the times we don't even get a choice.
Let's first talk about why they do it. Sugar, we have an evolutionary response to sugar, and that is that when we eat some sugar, our body deduces from that we're in the season of autumn and that the next season is food deprivation of winter. So the minute we eat a little bit of sugar, the body goes, oh crap, winter's coming, and it stimulates your appetite. So eating a little bit of sugar makes you hungry. That's why somebody can go to a beautiful restaurant, eat the bread, have the pasta, and still have dessert. Meanwhile, somebody else goes to a steak restaurant, doesn't eat the bread, has a steak and broccoli. They don't order dessert. They're satiated. Carbohydrates stimulate appetite. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. So the food industry has figured that out. And so they are now wanting to put sugar in everything that they can because by adding sugar to it, it stimulates your appetite. So it's a deep manipulation that starts there. So then let's talk about your direct question, and that is how they're doing it. They hijack emotional states and holidays. They've learned how to sponsor certain emotional states, and they've learned how to sponsor certain family rituals, celebrations, and holidays. A really fascinating example of this is Easter. I went to an Anglican school, and so because we had an Anglican school, there was a lot of Bible study in that school. And so there's that one part with the whole crucifixion, and I've read it a few times because we had to for Bible study. And do you know what I never saw in that part of the Bible? Chocolate. I've looked. It's not there. It's not there at all.
No chocolate eggs?
They didn't look for them. They weren't there. But today, you quite literally have people that cannot feel Easter unless they have chocolate. And so that's at a holiday level, but now there's an emotional level. What happened to us as children a lot of times is, you've seen it, right? Like the kid's running along, falls, skins their knee, looks up. If there's no parent, they just keep playing. But if a parent saw, particularly if it's mommy, they look up and they go, and the tears come, and because they know they can get love from that. But part of that relationship very often is, as a parent, you want to do anything you can to end that pain. And you know what's very good about that? Ice cream or chocolate chip cookies or chocolate or something. And so we distract children with those things. And what we don't realize in that moment is that we are doing something expedient that's giving us a short-term benefit in that moment. But the child is making a neural connection. They're making a connection that this chocolate chip cookie is equal to love and it's anesthetic in nature. It takes away my pain. And you wonder why now somebody's driving through, they go grocery shopping for the family in their 40s and they buy a box of chocolate chip cookies and scarf them down in the car on their way home because they know their kids shouldn't eat this stuff. So they do it in secret in the car. Why are they doing that? Because somebody gave them a cookie as a painkiller when they were a kid.
Right.
So if we can spot those relationships, we can begin to create freedom.
This sounds like an impossible task. I'm sure you'll hear that a lot.
Yeah, but it is not impossible. I know that it isn't because we've done it for hundreds of thousands of people. Like it absolutely works. And let me give you another one that I think you'll love this. And it's so, okay. My little girl and I are walking through the forest in the Dominican Republic a couple months ago. We were rescuing snakes. We rescue snakes and take them into the wilderness sometimes. And as we're walking through the forest, we come to one section of the forest where there's wild cacao trees growing, and the cacao happens to be in season. Cacao is the fruit, of course, that we make chocolate from, but what most people don't.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below. So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real. And he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. You probably know that we've just recently been re-platformed on YouTube after 25 months completely in the dark. The truth is, I really need your help. What I really need you to do is click on that subscribe button right now, like this video, and maybe even leave a comment or share the link with friends. We're really fighting against an algorithm that's tried to keep us quiet for so long, and the more subscribers we have, the more people watch our content, the better guests we can bring you, the better content, and we can continue transforming lives. We've been doing this for 14 years now. I want to do this for another 14 years, but I really need your help. So click on that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, share this, and we're going to continue to bring you more and more great content. Thank you. Most people will never see this opportunity. Dubai luxury transformation projects have historically delivered 40 to 90% annual returns. That is incredible. These were once reserved only for insiders with access. I spent 15 years on Wall Street, and I learned this: the biggest returns always go to the people who get the call first. Now, you finally can. We've just received a brand new project with major upside potential. Allocations move fast. Click the link, apply now, and speak to my team. This is your chance to see what others never will.